All right, we're live. Hope everybody's having an awesome day. I'm here with Greg Hurlbut, Pastor Greg Hurlbut. What's going on, man? Good to have you with me today.
Hey, glad to be with you, Duke. Appreciate you taking the time and having a great conversation tonight.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I also, for real, appreciate the reschedule here. You were supposed to be on the show, I guess, a couple of weeks ago. I was having some crazy, just so much anger, anger around our internet issues. Because we had upgraded and it's supposed to be pretty fantastic, pretty solid internet for all the different live streaming events that we do and stuff. But anyway, I digress. It was crazy because it lasted about 2 weeks of just like
Right.
problems and
Well,
bad stuff and rescheduling things. But I do appreciate your flexibility and thanks for
of
being
course,
with me today, man.
of course. So, I when you texted me, I think I said back to you, whenever I have a cancellation, it's always almost like a
Yeah.
little bit of freedom because almost my entire day is always scheduled full with like 5-minute, 10-minute breaks in there. And so, I got a free hour now.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, it's kind of like blessing in disguise.
Yeah.
That's that Mike Bickle lifestyle. I don't know if he would teach on that, on basically like dividing up your day into 5-minute segments. I was like, that's too much, man. That dude gets a
Yeah.
lot done. But anyway, but yeah, well, thank you, man. Thanks for being here.
Of
I
course.
forgot to ask if you prefer Greg or Gregory.
Greg, my mom calls me Gregory, but Greg's mostly what everybody else calls me.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you, man. I had an awesome conversation with your wife, Jessica, a couple of months back here on the podcast, and your name kept coming up. She kept bringing you up on the podcast, and I was like, man, Greg sounds like an awesome guy. Like, I think I even said at one point that you were like the MVP of that podcast or something along those lines. And I was like, I got to meet Greg. I got to talk to Greg. So I really do appreciate you, man. And thanks for being
Awesome.
here. We've got a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on. I want to talk to you in just a minute about the adoption run that you guys just got done
Yep.
doing, and we'll get into some stuff. But I would love if you could just share with us briefly just about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, so for those of you listening, and maybe some of my friends will jump on here or watch this later, but yeah, my name is Greg Hurlbut. I'm from upstate New York, Messina, New York, and when I say upstate, I mean all the way upstate on the Canadian border. We're closer to Canada than we are anywhere else. Montreal is only about an hour and 15 minutes from me. And we have a bridge right here in Messina that crosses over. So we're kind of half Canadian. But, well, not in the last 2 years because they haven't been overly friendly to us crossing. Hopefully we'll be
Okay.
friends again as countries sooner than later.
Is
Um,
that COVID related or is that
yeah, all COVID related. Right now they are letting us cross, but you have to get a test and you have to do that within 2 days ahead and you have to pay for it. It's just a pain. So no one's doing it yet
gotcha?
at the end of
Yeah.
the day. But yeah, and I've lived here actually most of my life, except for when I went to college. I went to Fredonia State, downstate, and then I went to Southeastern University in Florida, Assemblies of God College. But yeah, I've been living here most of my life, and actually I am the pastor of the church that I grew up in since I was born. My parents were going here previous to my birth, and now I'm pastoring that church.
Pause. Time out. uh and I want to make sure that we get back to your
Yeah.
story, because I do want to know about it, but I don't want to forget. Later on I'll forget to come back to this. So what is that like? And that might be a loaded question, but
Yeah.
what was that like, transitioning from the church that you grew up in to
Yep.
now you're the lead pastor, the senior pastor of that place? I'm just so curious, man. Well, first of all, how old were you when you moved into a pastoral role there?
Okay, so my wife and I got hired here doing the youth pastor work. Really, it was her actually first. I always make a joke that she was the star and I was just the sidekick. So it's
Come
funny.
on, man.
We'll mostly talk about each other in our separate, interviews here. And she was the star. We came back from college and they hired her full time. And I just kind of we did youth ministry together though. And that was 2005. So I was,
Okay.
21 at the time. And then we did youth ministry together up until 2016. Well, maybe a few years before that because of our children's situation, which I'm sure Jessica talked a little bit about possibly on her interview. But
Oh
up
yeah.
until 2016, we did youth ministry, and then I transitioned into the pastoral or lead pastoral role. So yeah, it was It was an interesting thing. I'm trying to figure out how to like say it in a concise way that's not crazy, but in some ways, a lot of things changed in the last 5 years with me as a leader and what our church is like. And it was all good change. It was needed change. But in sometimes when a church needs to change, because we've been around 40 years, we just celebrated our 40th anniversary in June. When a church has been around this long, sometimes it's easy to just get into a routine,
For
especially
sure.
when you've been successful. And we've been really successful as a church in a little area where there's not a lot of people, but we have a quite a large church for that. And so it's
Mm.
easy to kind of sit there and just say, well, look what we did. We did good. We can coast. We can just, kind of keep doing what we've always done. But I really felt like Jesus challenged me when I stepped into that role to say, just because you've been successful, don't stop there. Believe that there's more for the kingdom. There's more for what
Come on.
he's doing. And so yeah, it was honestly like some of it was a difficult transition simply because we were changing things we've done for 35 years. And but for me, and kind of your question was, what's it like transitioning in a church you've always been in? It was almost perfect in some ways, because when I pointed fingers, which I did, not in a literal sense, but like when I said, hey, we need to change, I meant we, meaning me. I've been here my whole life, and I
It's cool.
wasn't asking something of a group of people that, in a sense, I didn't live the way they did, or we didn't do church the way they did, and now we're changing a little bit of our philosophy, a little bit of our direction, or just even a little bit of how we did things, to really see the vision that we believe God's always had over this church happen. So it was really good in those ways. I wondered for a while what it would be like for especially the older crowd we have. 50% of our church is 50 and older. And, for them, I was, little Greg Hurlbut that, they probably
Right.
babysat me, and we had a Christian
Right.
school here for years, and some of them were my teachers. And, what would that be like for them, in a sense, to be led by me, who's younger? I'm the youngest person on our staff, actually, except for
Hmm.
our youth pastor now. We have
Wow.
11 staff, and I'm the youngest of those, except for one who's our youth pastor. I'm the
Yeah.
youngest person on our eldership team. I often have joked saying I always find myself being the youngest person in a room, and I'm not sure why that is. Maybe I'm just old in my head. I'm not sure, but um,
Your wisdom beyond your years, Greg.
I'm not sure. You can ask the groups if that's true, but anyway. So yeah, it was a transition for sure, but it's been a fantastic one, actually, and the church is flourishing in ways that we've always talked and dreamed about, and are now, I believe, beginning to see. The 40-year anniversary is just, it's such a significant number in the Bible, right? Um,
Yeah.
the whole promised land thing, and just kind of 40 years of this history, but now we're moving into a new season, and so that's kind of where we really feel we are. I don't know if that answered your question about what it's like, but yeah, it's
Perfectly. Perfectly, Greg.
I know
You're
that
off
it's
to a
not
great
normal,
start.
actually, in the church world. It's just not normal.
Hmm.
A lot of
Yeah.
people, they're applying for a job somewhere. They're moving from place to place, maybe even in different denominations. They're kind of working their way up a ladder of sorts. Our
Sure.
culture here has really never been that way. And I actually appreciate it. And I'm not saying that the other
Hmm.
way is wrong. It's really been kind of always homegrown grassroots here, which I think matters, especially in rural contexts,
Yeah.
which is a big heart of mine. Rural church planting, rural context of the U.S. We have a lot of church planting things, and this is kind of one of my big things. There's a lot of church planting techniques, patterns in the U.S. that are being very successful, but they're mostly successful in contexts that surround really urban areas. They're not actually in urban areas, but suburban areas, right? So it's like,
Mm.
these 100 to 500,000, person areas, and churches are going there,
Hmm.
and they're developing, and they're really hitting it out of the park and all that kind of thing. But the truth is, only 50% of America lives in suburban and urban areas. The other 50% live in rural areas. And
True.
so my heart is, who's reaching the 50% living in rural areas? I know it's not as glamorous to go to a place where there's only 10,000 people, but those 10,000 people matter to Jesus. So anyway,
Absolutely, man. I love that so much. I love that. I love that you've got that sort of niche where, God's placed you and that there's that kind of passion there to do that. And
Right.
I think it's super important and I love it. As you were talking there, I was thinking about it. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you were talking about the sort of homegrown grassroots kind of a
Yeah.
feel. I imagine that you guys have a very sort of tight knit sort of sense of community, within your church, within your
Yeah.
congregation, and all of that. And I love that. I think that's so cool. I was actually the reason why one of the reasons why I was kind of very fascinated and why I wanted to ask you that question is because I think that so often it's tricky for people to sort of shift their concept of who somebody is,
Right.
and so people that sort of spent, maybe had all these years in the church and they saw you, like you said, as little Greg Hurlbut, and they watched
Yeah.
you growing up and they probably saw you, I don't know what kind of a kid you were, but they probably saw you making mistakes and, you know what I mean, causing
Yeah.
trouble here and there. And
Oh yeah.
then sort of making that shift in your mind of, oh, well, now this person is in a place of leadership. I'm supposed to, relate to them in a different way. It could definitely be tricky. I mean, even Jesus said, you know, that prophet's not without honor except
Right.
in his own hometown, where he's from. And that can definitely be the case just because there's familiarity there. But I think that begins to shift naturally as you step into that role and as people begin to see the anointing that's on your life and people begin to see, I mean, it sounds trite to say it this way, but they sort of see your competency and your
Yeah.
ability to lead, and to do that well. And
And
so
that's
I just think
honestly
that
one of
that's
the
really cool.
greatest compliments I get. It's like, even in just, I don't care if, who you are as a pastor or a leader or, a speaker. At the end of the day, you are looking, and I'm not saying that this is like my motivation, but you are trying to understand, am I making an impact? And so when people say things, it's appreciated, right? I'm not trying to take the honor on myself for what God's doing, but at the end of the day, when I speak or when I'm leading, if no one's ever says anything to you about how you're leading, I would honestly just say you might want to question how you're leading, because there should be a place where people are saying thank you for that, or even the opposite
Yeah.
of like, hey, this isn't working for me, you know. Um, but one of the greatest compliments I get is especially from our crowd that's a little bit older, that I've known my whole life, that just, they really they take a moment to say something that's so honoring to me, and really, and they call me pastor. They'll say, oh, hey, Pastor Greg. They'll walk in, and truthfully, we've never had a big title culture here at all. I you know
Yeah.
I'm you can say all sorts of things you want about that, and we don't push that or anything like it.
Hmm.
For me, pastoring is a function, not a title. And
Come on.
so but when someone takes the effort to actually call me that, it's really an honoring thing, which I think a lot of them are purposely saying, this is how we see you now.
Mm.
And it really does matter, in a lot of those ways. So, but yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, I've always thought about that whole like title thing, and I don't know. Like, I've never been a big fan of titles either.
Me
I
either.
think that, but one thing that I've always sort of, I guess, had in my mind is I think the title thing is more so for them than it is for you. You know what I mean? More so for them than it is for
I
us,
agree.
because I think that there's an aspect of ministry where, like, we as a person, as a human, like, I want to be as relational, as relatable, as possible. But I think that there's a point where, maybe there's a line that we can cross where then it can become a little bit too familiar, where not everybody, because some people would not have a problem making that distinction. But I think that a lot of people do have a challenge making the distinction between, oh, well, this is my friend and this is my pastor and this is
Sure.
my brother and this is my sister and this is my, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And sort of like when those lines become blurry, it can become tricky for the person, for the average person, I'd say, to really learn and receive, from a person who's in a position of leadership when that sort of distinction doesn't exist, I would say.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I've been the same way. I'm kind of like, because and I do have that, like you're saying, like when my When people in our church refer to me as Pastor Duke, there is something there. I really do appreciate it. I really do appreciate the honor, but I don't care at all if someone
Right.
just calls me Duke. Um,
Right.
but but I feel like there's a balance there. There's a tension in my mind because I would just be like, just call me Duke. Like forget it.
Right.
Just forget about that. But at the same time, I think for them, it's beneficial to, recognize
Yeah.
that there is that place of authority and there is that position, because in the long run, I think even just on a subconscious level, it helps them to
Right.
uh, maybe be in a position where they're better able to receive from you. If that
Yeah, I think
makes
I
sense.
spent a couple of years like really telling people, "Don't call me that." Like that's just weird. Like, and honestly, part of it was just because a lot of my life, I didn't believe I belonged in ministry. I just didn't think it was for me. I did it with Jessica. It was Jessica's thing. And that's what I jokingly would have said I was her sidekick. It was her dream. It was always her dream to be in ministry. And then somehow I found myself here. And even there's almost daily or weekly, I'm going, how did I end up in this? This is just strange. Like this was not my plan. But so sometimes I kind of put that off quite a bit. People would say, I'm like, oh no, don't call me pastor. Like, oh, that's just weird. But then I, kind of realize, all right, well, I also don't want to reject the role that Jesus has designed for me. It's
Yeah.
him. So
Yeah, that's really good. All right, man. Well, I interrupted you before. I'd
yeah.
love to just jump back into that and hear the rest of
So yeah, that's a
your
little bit about
story.
me.
So you
Yeah.
became a
So
pastor. You're pastoring the church that you grow up in, and
pastoring the church grew up in. I'm 37 years old. My wife and I have been married since I was 20, so 17 years now.
wow,
Just this
awesome.
August, we have 5 kids. 2 of them are adopted. We've had them since birth, adopted. 2 of our biological kids are autistic. And then my son, who's 13, is just a wonderful, typical, actually, he's not really typical. He's just an extraordinary 13-year-old. Um, he really is a great kid, and he helps us survive in our life with our
Wow.
other kids. So shout out to Jeremiah.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's kind of our life. And in the midst of that, believing that we're here for purpose. And so everything we do, our decisions are made out of that. Jessica and I, that's kind of always been our drive together. It's just like, what can we do to really influence the world around us? And ultimately always for Jesus.
Mm,
It's not always, maybe wearing the pastoral cap like you had just brought up. We did an adoption run. A National Adoption Day was this last weekend. Maybe we can talk about that for a minute. But
love to.
yeah, so National Adoption Day was this last weekend. And 4 years ago, my wife, who is an incredible runner, I'll just give you a little history with her for running. It started when we started having kids, and she started going, I think I'm going to go for a run. And then that run would turn into like 30 minutes, and then an hour, and then 3 hours, and it just kept getting longer and longer. It was kind of her space for herself, and she realized she loved running long distances. So she ran her first marathon actually on our it was 10 years ago now. On our 7th anniversary, we went to Hawaii. It was a great marathon to pick. She ran the Maui Marathon along the
Wow.
coast in Maui, which was gorgeous.
I guess if you got to run a marathon, it might
Yeah.
as well be in Maui, right?
So I'll tell you what, it was brutally hot. So
Okay.
but anyway, I mean, I didn't run. Listen, I don't run. People are like, oh, you run too with Jess? I'm like, no, I sit at the end and eat
That
donuts and like cheer on. Yeah,
sidekick. That
sidekick
that
moment.
part that part didn't rub off on you, I guess.
No, so probably about her 3rd marathon, she decided, or actually she came running in. We were just here in New York and Corning, and she came running in at the end, 26.2 miles. She did about 3 hours and 50 minutes. And she comes running in, and she's all tired and hot, and she just goes, I think I could run further. And I was like, what? Like right now? I was confused. I'm like, what are you talking about? You just ran 26 miles.
That doesn't make sense, Jessica.
Who says I think I can run further? Okay. And she's like, no, I think I just want to run longer runs. I'm like, you're there. Okay. You're weird, but whatever. So she did her first ultra
Fantastic.
about 5-6 years ago, a 50 miler. And then from there, she decided she was going to keep upping it, and she did. Well, she got an idea because we love and really advocate for adoption in the U.S. and foster care services, and just really think it's the heart of God for the world. He adopted us, right? Romans teaches us. And so we just feel like it's a big thing. So she found out 110,000 kids in 2018 were freed to be adopted in the United States. They're just waiting for a family. And that was in 2018. And so she said, you know what? I'm going to run 110 miles. I'm like, you're insane, but I love you. So she started training to run a 110-mile run consecutively over 24 hours without stopping by herself. And so we had it all planned. And honestly, she got crazy media coverage up here, and it was awesome. And the morning we woke up, so we were going to do it on Adoption Day, which is always this like second, third week in November. We wake up because we live in northern New York, and it's actually very strange. We don't have snow yet. But we looked outside, and it was the first major snowstorm of the year. I remember looking out, our upstairs bedroom window, and I'm like, yeah, there's about 10 inches of snow out there. Okay. So Jessica's like, what are we going to do? I'm like, you're going to run? It's Adoption Day. What are we going to do? You can't postpone it. So she ran in the snowstorm, and she ran about the first 45 miles, which just is insane, right? With cleats on her shoes. I don't even know where you're living right now, Duke, but here, when it's really snowy and icy, people put these stretchy cleats that go over over your shoe sole, and it just gives you good traction, right?
Okay.
So it was such a mess how she put those on and ran in those, but she had never trained running in cleats, right? And it kind of messed with her ankles. So around mile 45, she started to struggle, which is just amazing anyway. But she wouldn't stop because I couldn't get her to. So she made it all the way to mile 70 before I literally just was dragging.
Kidnapped her.
I was trying to drag her into the vehicle. She was moving, but not fast, and she just was determined. I'm going to do this. I said, babe, listen, it's okay. You can't finish it. Well, in that process, in the last hour, it took me to convince her to get done. I called a bunch of friends that I knew were runners. I said, listen, she's going to die if she has to stop and doesn't finish this thing, but let's get some people. Let's finish it for her. And so I got about 15 different runners that finished the last, whatever that is, the last 40 miles of the run, 70 of it. And so it was actually really just an amazing setup moment, because the whole point was, we can't save the world. And there's 110,000 kids. I can't adopt all those kids. I adopted 2. That's what I can do. But together, we might actually be able to make a dent in this. Jessica always puts this statistic out that if just 1 in 3 churches in the U.S. adopted 1 child, 1 in 3 churches, because we have over 300,000 churches, every adoptable child would be gone like that.
Wow.
They'd be in a family. Just if 1 church decided to say, we'll adopt 1 kid, and only 3, 1 in the 3 churches did that. And for us, I think this is a challenge. What are we doing as Christians? Should we not be making an impact in these realms? And so it was kind of this great moment where we realized, you know what, we can't do this on our own, but together we can. And so every year since then, we've done it as a relay, 24 hours still. But of course, the numbers have gone up. So we're at 125
it goes up, right?
miles. Yeah.
There's
125,000 kids right now free to be adopted in the United States. And so we ran 125 miles on Friday and Saturday from 3 p.m. to 3 p.m. 1 hour legs is what people sign up for. And those are between 5 and 6 miles each. And it's, so it's not a fast pace, but you still have to be able to run. Some people are like, can we walk it? I'm like, no, you won't be able to keep up. Sorry. And because we are kind of stick to this timetable. And again, people are like, some people show up and they want to run it super fast. And I actually am like, nope, that's not the point. We call it a run. We don't call it a race, because the idea is to do it together. And so, we don't want someone running like 10 miles ahead of the other group or something. So, so we had about 100 runners this Saturday, and they did it all through the night. Myself and a great friend of mine stay up in the car, and we track behind them kind of as the pacer vehicle with our flashers on. And usually through a bunch of the townships in our county, the police come out and follow for us for a while, and we always have people waiting on the sides of the road and just cheering on the runners. And
It's awesome.
yeah, it's really a great thing, and it's all about awareness. People usually ask, how can I donate money? And we always just say, oh, we're not interested in money. We're just interested in people considering adopting, people considering the
Wow.
reality of maybe being a foster parent or respite parent,
Hmm.
doing something to impact kids' lives in the
Wow.
U.S. around us. And so that's kind of what we've been doing for the last 5 years, and it's been awesome.
That's an incredible thing, Greg, for real. And you keep throwing around jokingly this sidekick word, but I told Jessica when she was on the show that I really I consider you and her just modern day superheroes, because this is the stuff that really matters, man.
Yeah,
This is so big, and you've already got so much on your plates with your own family, your own children, 5 kids of your own and 2 with special needs, and as pastors, and like it's just all the stuff that you guys do. And then you also have this piece of your heart that is just so um just passionate about these children that they could be adopted like
yeah,
today, right? All of these children, 125, and obviously there's way more than that, right? In the foster care system, there's way more children
way more
that
than that.
need to be adopted, but
I think it's almost 4 times that in the foster care
yeah,
system. But yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was gonna say I was thinking it was somewhere around 500,000 or so,
yeah.
in the system, but yeah, it's 125,000 children that are ready to be placed in a home. What does that mean, exactly, Greg, when you say that there's 125,000 kids in the foster care system that are ready to be adopted? What does that actually mean?
So basically, what it means is that whatever situation they came from, parental situation or home situation, the government is no longer trying to place them back into their homes. And what it means is that the government has now taken action and either terminated the rights of the parents or guardians, or they have been surrendered the rights of those parents or guardians, and
Mm,
now they're just wards of the system, and they're completely adoptable. Meaning, someone could literally show up today, say, "I want to adopt this child," and it wouldn't, the court's slow, so it would take a couple months, but
mhm.
immediately that child could be placed with a family who's going to adopt them, and then the court system would take a couple months to do the paperwork legally. But it means that there's no other family attachments, and in fact, the government will not place them back. So every child that comes in foster care has a title called return to parent. It's always the
Okay.
government's first goal: return them to parent.
Sure, sure, sure.
So yeah, which is, it's got to be the right thing, right? Like, you can't just have government deciding, oh, we're going to take your kids and not give them back easily. So the government then goes through a process, and it's a kind of, it's cruddy. I mean, I'll just be honest. We're
Yeah,
super advocates for the foster care system, but it's broken
it's
really
broken.
badly.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
always say, anytime you send the government to do the church's job, they're going to do a bad job at it. And this
Wow.
is the church's job. We should be taking care of, this is James, right? True religion is taking care of widows and
Widows and
orphans in their
orphans.
distress.
Yeah, man.
And instead, we've sent the government to do it, and then we wonder why they do a bad job. It's just not what they were built for. The government was not built for this. I do appreciate the people in it. My gosh, they all know we love. I say these things to their faces. So,
Yeah.
our local DSS and our local foster future system here. But yeah, so it means they're just ready. So you can actually go on adoptuskids.org right now,
Mhm.
and there's a massive listing of kids. You'll see pictures, you'll hear stories. And honestly, I always warn people, don't go on there if you don't want your heart ripped out, because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, you're going to realize how many kids are just out there, and they make them, they take little videos, please adopt me. And it's like, it's heart-wrenching, honestly.
Of
Um,
course.
I try not to let my wife go on there still, because she's like, we could fit 2
We
more. I'm
could
like,
do what
I love them, but they can live at someone else's house.
Get away from the computer, Jessica.
Yeah. So, but it is, so that means what it means. They're free to be adopted. So they've just already been through so much unfortunate,
Yeah.
probably system stuff. And that means usually years. They've been in the system for years. They've probably even been home multiple times and then retaken back into the
Yeah.
system.
Oh,
And the government now says, you're never going to change. This situation is never going to change. It's too dysfunctional. We'll not send kids back there. And
Wow.
so, yeah. And now, like, I think the statistic is that 90 kids every single day age out of that. So a lot of the reasons these kids don't get adopted is they're older. And most people that are really thinking about adoption, they have this idea of like, I want to get a baby from the hospital. But you got 18-year-old kids, 17, 18-year-old kids. The minute they hit 18 years old, they age out. And literally that means like, good luck. There's very
Yeah.
little after services after foster care for these kids, and so they
Yeah.
end up going into the world with no family that's healthy at least, and the statistics for what happens to them afterwards is pretty rough to
Yeah.
know too. A lot end up in
Yeah.
you know prison, jail. I mean, actually a
Yeah.
lot of the prostitution that happens in major cities, if you actually talk to these women, most of them were foster care, got out of the system, and this is where they ended up on the streets, being sold, not by their own choices, but all the crap that's around that. We have
Yeah.
friends that are really big into kind of that whole stuff in Dallas and Houston, so we hear
Wow.
terrible stories.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the 125,000 kids right now in the U.S. just waiting, hoping maybe someone will adopt me.
Wow.
Yep.
It's wow. And it's so I would think that the majority of people that do adopt, that do adopt children, the majority of people would you say this is true? It's just what I've heard, I guess, but that the majority of people that are trying to adopt children, they want babies, right? Like
Yeah,
they're looking for as young as they can be because they want to raise them, of course, and for understandable and for obvious
totally
reasons.
understandable. Yeah,
But there's so many kids in the foster care system, like you said, that are aging out. I mean, just imagine that if you could adopt a child who's already a teenager, but just like the difference that you could make in that child's life in,
yeah,
2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it is before they sort of reach that age of adulthood. It could be pretty phenomenal. I know that those tend to be probably some of the more difficult
yeah,
ones, right?
yeah.
Where it's hard to impact a teenager who's already, set in their ways or had a rough life or, whatever the case may be. I can imagine that there's got to be so many, not
So
even,
much.
I've zero experience. My oldest son is 11, so I'm not quite there yet, as far as even dealing with teenagers in that on that level. But I could just imagine that it's
Yeah,
just an unreal struggle, and that's why I really do believe that people that advocate for this kind of stuff and more importantly, those who actually get in there and are willing to adopt or become a foster parent or something like that are real heroes in my book.
yeah,
And I really, really just appreciate you guys so much for the work that you're doing and the awareness that you're bringing around this. I imagine that because you're not taking in donations and things like that, it's more of a sense of doing these events every year that are geared toward building awareness. I imagine that that's probably not super trackable, but are you aware of on any level, like what kind of an impact that you guys have that it's been having on people?
yeah. And again, like you said, it's not overly trackable. Though Jessica does have some numbers for that. I probably don't know them off the top of my head, but I know that every single year we have probably at least a dozen or more stories from the run specifically where people say, I just signed up for the foster care classes. We had people, I actually had 2 runners this year that have ran with us the last 3 years. And during the run, they showed me the certificate. They had just completed their foster care classes this year. So they ran just with us to support us. And then after 3 years of kind of feeling like, why are we not doing this?
Wow.
Even one of the conversations I had with the runners, and most of these runners, I don't know them. They're runners, right? They love running events and it's a good cause. And so they show up. Well, one of the runners that's run with us the last 4 years in Ogdensburg region, which is like 45 minutes from Messina drive wise. She's a little bit older lady. She's retired. And she said, I don't know if I could adopt, but I could at least take these kids in. I have a 5-bedroom house.
Oh,
And she goes,
come
I was
on.
a nurse. And she goes, I'm going to go sign up. So we hear those things a lot, and people message,
Amazing.
especially Jessica's influence now just in social media and kind of the wide range that she's made with that. We hear stories weekly of people that are impacted by our adoption foster care kind of advocation, along with the special needs stuff. But a lot of it is around that, people signing up, and we also get the tough stories. Man, I tried this and this is what happened. I'm like, listen, I got all the same stories, because at the end of the day, you're going to be taking in, people who have some brokenness,
Sure.
and what I always say to Christians, and because honestly, most of our, I'm advocating for anybody to adopt, but at the end of the day, like I said earlier, I believe it's the church's job. And so I'm advocating to Christians, and even I've had Christians that say, I just don't know if that child's needs fit our family, and I hear all that, and I absolutely would never pressure someone to do something that they don't feel they're
Yeah.
supposed to do. But I always say, man, I'm glad Jesus doesn't look at me that way.
Come on.
Because I am a problem child for Jesus. I
Yeah.
reject him. I don't do what he asks me to do. I kind of do the same dumb things over and over and over and wonder why I get the same results. And then we have kids in our lives that do those, and we're like, well, that's just too much work. I'm like, man, we're real lucky Jesus doesn't treat us and even doesn't
That's right.
pick and choose, right? Like, it is a weird world, because like you go on US or adoptuskids.org and you can pick and choose. And it's like,
Right.
it's kind of a weird thing. But at the end of the day, I'm glad Jesus isn't going, well, you have too many special needs, so I'm not going to adopt you.
Come on.
But he takes us freely. And so, again, I would just say to anybody, entertain it, pray about it, think about it. Maybe Jesus is calling you to care for one kid. Maybe it's a kid in foster care you're going to get for 6 months, and you're going to make an impact in their life that you don't have an idea of the ripple effect of what it might mean for them, even if you don't adopt them. And so I would just challenge people, think about it.
Wow. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. I love what you guys are doing. It's so cool. So it was just this past Saturday?
Yep, Saturday.
And
So
Saturday,
Friday
yeah.
Friday at 3 p.m. to Saturday at 3 p.m. Yep.
Did so now that it's different, that it started off like you said, years ago when it first started, and it was just Jessica, but then by the end of it, you were calling people and getting people
Yep.
in and stuff like that. It really seems like that kind of worked, in your favor, or in the favor of this becoming an ongoing thing. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I've seen some of those pictures of Jessica, like just in the snow running, and it's really incredible. And if you look at, without knowing the story, you would look at that and you just be like, okay, that person's out for like a jog in the snow. But it's like, no, she's like, I don't know what mile that was on the pictures that I saw, but like, oh no, that's like mile 32 or
A couple of
whatever
the
it was.
famous ones, like the one that made it in the paper, she was in mile 20 something. But then there's this footprint one we use a lot, where I took a picture of her footprints in the
Yeah.
snow. We're in the middle of nowhere too, literally just running in the backwoods to get from one highway to the next. And that was around mile 40, and she's just trucking along. And yeah, I always share this one embarrassing picture of her. We stopped at a gas station. We had a couple fitness trainers really helping us, and we were basically, it was pretty gross. We were peeling her socks off her feet, and she had kind of already damaged her feet in way. I mean, I don't know if you guys are listening, know anything about ultra runners, but it's super common for them to lose their toenails, for their skin to basically just come off. And for some reason, these people just keep running. I don't get it, but they're pretty incredible humans. So, her feet were pretty messed up by that point. And so we knew it would be that way. So we had new shoes, new socks. We were going to dress her feet. You kind of dress your feet in a certain way. And so this fitness trainer had met us. And so she's like there, and I'm like, it's this picture of her foot up, and I'm holding her foot up and I'm peeling her sock off, and she's making this like horrible face. And so I always laugh. And I post it every year. Remember this? You remember
Remember this?
I think it was mile 55 or something. And she's like, stop sharing that photo.
That's so crazy.
But yeah.
So with the new, the way that it's done now with all these different people running different legs throughout the 125-mile stretch, does Jessica still get out there and run
Oh
longer
yeah.
distances? Like how did that work this year?
Yeah, so what she's doing mostly is running a few different legs, not tons. Sometimes she's done like 10-mile distances, depending on the people who are running, and sometimes our needs. Because by the time you get to 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, you don't have as many people like, yeah, we're
Hmm.
gonna show up. Though we did have a ton this year at those legs. So she usually runs 3 different specific legs that are kind of in some, like what we would say, some important spaces. So we run from Messina to we have a reservation right near us called the Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation, and it's there's about 16,000 people there, and we're pretty close with their foster care and prevention, family services that they have, and they've always been incredibly supportive. The Mohawk
Mm,
tribal police come out and escort us. They set up this big tent and all these people come out, and it's honestly a big deal there. So we always have her run that leg because they're like, she's their hero. So we make sure she ends up in these spots where,
that's
a
cool.
lot of people are. And then this year, I got to a spot where I had 3 runners. The night before, someone got exposed to COVID. The
Okay.
morning of that part of the run, so it's like 6 in the morning, and I get a text, and that leg was at 10 a.m. And the second, or the next 2 runners both say, we injured ourselves and we can't run, and we're, like, they were all assuming they had extra people, which they did, but 3 cancellations on one leg was pretty
Yeah.
uncommon, and it was kind of one of my lower amounts of people on the leg, so I was like, shoot. And so I thought, well, actually, no, I'm sorry, the third person I thought was going to run it. So I thought, well, we have one person. It's whatever. That one will just have a single runner. It's not a big deal. But I get there, and we happen to get there early and to the spot because, we kind of are pretty regulated on our times, but sometimes the runners get a little soon. So we're about 20
Yeah, yeah,
minutes
yeah.
early to the spot, which, is no big deal. Well, the runner usually takes a small break, and then they'll pass the baton. And I was like, they're not here. So I'm like, I'm going to text them. So I just text them. I said, just, hey, making sure, you know where the right spot is. This was a runner I hadn't, met before. And she goes, oh, I'm not running in person because we have a whole virtual legs stuff set up. So people can basically run virtually anywhere they want. And we have
Okay.
people actually from all over. We have running clubs that run from all over the world. And then they send in videos
Wow.
and stuff. Yeah.
That's
And
really
so
cool.
she had signed up virtually, but I knew she was a local person. So when I saw her name, I didn't think it was virtual. I had written it in wrong. And so I'm like, oh,
Okay.
shoot. Now, one year this happened to me before, and I had to run the leg because I was like, and I'm like a bull, man. I am not made for running. And so me and my buddy who were in the vehicle, we literally took time. We were like, I ran a mile, he ran a mile, I ran a mile, and we were
That's so
dead.
funny.
We were like, no one ever will get
That's awesome.
documentation of this ever. I think I was running in jeans and a sweater, like.
Yeah, that's not recommended.
But just so I called Jessica, and she like raced out there to run that extra leg. So she ran an extra leg this year just because I
That's awesome.
basically made a mistake. But so
That's
yeah,
so
she
cool.
still loves running. She's not running 50 milers on any normal basis, but yeah, she loves to run.
So cool. Love it. Love what you guys are doing there, and just really, really appreciate it. I want to shift gears just a little bit because I wanted
Yeah.
to ask you about your podcast, the new podcast that you and Jessica are doing together, the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. To get into that, we probably need to. You shared a little bit already about having 2 children of your own that have autism, and so of course that's a big part of your life, and of course that's a big part of this
Yep.
podcast. You guys kind of sharing your stories and stuff like that. So if you would, though, just share a little bit of your heart behind this podcast
Yeah.
and the impact that you guys are looking to have through it.
Yeah, so we have 2 children that have special needs. That's kind of the general term, but it's really, uh, it's severe autism. It's not. It's kind of on the more difficult end of the autism spectrum. So my daughter was diagnosed when she was 3. My son about the same time. My daughter is now 12 years old. Mara is her name, and Jacob is 8 years old.
Mm.
And Mara didn't talk till she was 6, 7 years old. Very difficult. She kind of has a very aggressive, loud, somewhat angry personality, and so she's a handful in those ways. Whereas my son is actually the exact opposite of that. I'm messing up my hair on the camera because it's going the opposite way. He's kind of like really reclusive. You can almost get him to say nothing. He can talk, but he won't talk. Neither of them can converse with you. There's no conversation to be had. It's just more like, I want a banana. Like it's very little communication. So yeah, that was very difficult. In our podcast, obviously, you can listen to a lot of the struggles along the way. But I think honestly, the biggest struggle. Well, two big struggles. One was for me spiritually as a pastor. I became extremely disillusioned with God. Actually, it was the idea that I was serving this incredible Savior and this God that I know and I love and I've had experiences with, but yet he would allow this kind of thing to happen in my life. And it's kind of that age-old question that all of us deal with. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why do we lose people? Why? It's the big why of life, right? But it hit us hard in this way with special needs kids. And so, that was a long process, which I don't want to get into that part of it today. But the second part was just simply feeling really alone in it, not knowing anything ourselves at the beginning, and trying to find information. And my wife is kind of an information junkie. I'm not necessarily built the same way as her, but she was always searching for everything there was about autism and how to parent and all this stuff. And there's lots of incredible autism information out there, but there was almost zero autism and faith information, because for us, we couldn't
Yeah.
separate the two.
Yeah.
I live in a world where I believe God loves me. He's a part of my life. He's not distant. He's not just out there, spun the world on his fingertips and is now watching from distance. No, he's involved. And so if I believe that, then I needed to figure out how to honestly struggle through, which is okay to admit, to struggle through a place of where is my faith in the midst of this circumstance, and how do I deal with my practical real life of dealing with children on the autism spectrum, and how do I reconcile that with my faith and my spirituality and what I know
Wow.
and believe about God? How do I put those two together? Well, there was nothing for that. Nothing. Like nothing. I mean, we could not
Yeah.
find anyone to talk to or anything. Jessica went to a couple,
Wow.
autism support groups, and just quickly felt like, this is not what I'm needing. I'm needing hope. I'm not just needing, this like, commiseration that kind of happens sometimes when people live.
Yeah.
And I can say that because I do it at times. It's easy to commiserate when people are struggling in the same struggle,
Yeah.
but that's not where you want to live, right? If you live there all the time, that's not a healthy place. And
Come on.
so that's where the podcast really was born out of. Jessica just really fell. And even what the book she's writing and all the influence things she's writing is around not just autism itself, but really what it meant for us as parents, what it meant for my children, my other children, what it means even for my 13-year-old who's growing up in a world that is difficult, not by any of his choices, but he has to deal with it. And so, there's all these things you have to process through. And we felt, man, if we didn't have anybody, maybe we can be that for other people. And so that's kind of where the podcast was born. And it's the idea of like, maybe, for 20, 25 minutes, we both said it's got to be short, because at the end of the day, try to get us to sit down and listen to something in the midst of 5 kids. It's not always easy. And so we wanted to make it easy, and we wanted to make it practical, but we wanted to make it hope filled. And so that's kind of where the full spectrum parent, and really that's why we called it full spectrum parent, not just autism, even though it is about autism. Full spectrum because we have 5 kids that are all very different. My typical teenager, but like I said, he's living in a world that's not as simple as maybe
Yeah.
some teenagers, and how he deals with that. We have 2 adopted kids, and that's a whole gamut in itself of walking with 2 children who are now at an age where they completely understand and realize that their parents, their biological parents, didn't take care of them for some reason, and they're trying to figure life out in the midst of that. And one of my son, Isaac, who's adopted, he's about to turn 9 this weekend. He's the most introspective human I think I've ever met. And so he asks the deepest questions, and I'm just like, ugh, and some of them are heart-wrenching because he's realizing, like, this, he loves us. It's, sometimes it's painful to hear, but it's like he's desperate to understand why his mom didn't take care of him, and so
Wow.
we're just walking through all those things. And so anyway, and even just what that means, of course, with our 2 autistic kids, and then so Jessica came up with all of the stuff around it. I do the tech stuff behind it, but so it's the Full Spectrum Parent Faith-Based Autism podcast, and what we do is a dose of help, a dose of humor, and a dose of hope. That's kind of our language there. So it's practical. We tell really ridiculous stories of our lives, so that hopefully makes people feel better about their ridiculous stories. And then we talk a little bit about where does Jesus fit into this? Where does our faith fit into this? So yeah.
It's good. Well, hey, listen, I'm a listener. I'm a subscriber. I really love what you guys are doing. I remember when when I spoke to Jessica, it was before she was on the podcast.
Yep.
We had a just quick phone conversation, and she brought that up, that it was something that you guys were thinking about doing at the time, and I was just like, you got to do it,
Yeah.
do it, make it happen. I was I'm so glad that you guys decided to do it, because for all the reasons that you mentioned, right? So first of all, because of who you guys are, which at the time I didn't really know. I had never spoken to you, you know what I mean, until today, right? This is the first time that we've actually talked.
Yeah, just texted.
I just realized that. Yeah, exactly. Just some back and forth. But I was aware of you guys. I was aware of the fact that you were pastors, and a little bit about just very surface level stuff, I guess. But the fact that when she was telling me that this is a world where there's no real content around this, like there is no other podcast that is specifically like there, like you said, there's all kinds of resources, of course, for autism, and of course for parents with children on the spectrum, but as far as faith-based resources that are actually helping you to have hope as the foundation for these conversations and all of that, and I was just like, please do it. Please do it. I'm always pushing people, Greg, like to do podcasts because I love podcasting. I love this medium. And anytime, if you have a good voice, if you have something that you're passionate about, and specifically if it's an area where there's a void there, there's a gap there in the resources that are available. I think that what you guys are doing is just it's incredible, and it's extremely, extremely important. And I'm so glad that you guys are doing this for real, and I'm sharing your episodes and stuff like that, because I really do like just want to champion what you guys are doing, because I think it's so important. And I love the content itself, the way that you guys approach the conversations and the way that you guys approach each other. I think is really cool. You're very accessible, and your conversations, they're funny. You invite people in the way that you're so honest with one another about your own struggles. And so that's really cool that you do that. That it's not just, well, okay, guys, we're gonna tell you how it's done, and this is how it's like no, like this has been it's been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over the years going through this, and we're gonna talk to you guys about all the stuff that we've screwed up.
Pretty much.
But I mean, not that sounded probably a little bit crass.
No, it's exactly what we feel like.
But yeah, but at the same time, you really, in other words, it's not just that. There's also there's a ton of wisdom there. I remember listening to I don't know if it's the most recent episode, might have been 2 episodes ago. You guys were talking about discipline, I believe.
2 episodes ago.
And just something that I heard you guys talking about. I'm probably gonna, because I'm just trying to remember. I'm probably gonna butcher it, but I remember you saying a couple things about discipline, like um, when it comes to disciplining your kids, and of course you guys have an extreme sort of challenge in this area of discipline, because you have three children that don't have autism and two children that do, and kind of navigating this world of how do we
Yep.
discipline our kids? Do we discipline them the same? Do we discipline them differently? Do we do kind of navigating through that whole thing? And but you guys talked about being consistent in the way that you discipline, but at the same time not being so hard nosed in
Yeah.
it that you can't recognize when you've gone too far.
Yeah.
And that's something that, like, I tell people that I'm really big on, and so that really spoke to me was, you know, there's like been so many times where, like, I've had to go and apologize to my kids because I just went too far,
Mhm. Yep.
because I just acted out of my emotion, because they did something that made me mad, and then instead of making the discipline, because the other thing you guys said was that the discipline always has to be about them. The
Yeah.
making the discipline, it's for them, it's for their growth, it's for their betterment. And there's been times where I've just been mad, and out of emotion just spoke too harshly or something, and some carried out some form of discipline that it just it was led by my emotion, and it was
Yeah.
not coming from this place of this is for your good.
Yeah,
And
you can easily
so
lose sight of, like, what the purpose was for the disciplining to begin with, and the disciplining can't be just out of consequence. Like, the whole episode's about discipline should be about shaping. And we talk a little bit about that Proverbs verse that I would just say it gets misrepresented. The whole if you spare the child, or
spare the
spare the
rod,
rod,
spoil the
spoil the
child. Yeah.
child, and which is actually just a paraphrase. It doesn't actually say it that way in scripture,
Right.
just so you know. But the idea of what that staff meant as a shepherd, it was not a staff for beating. Uh,
Come on.
Typically, it was a staff for shaping, and it was meant to guide and direct. And so there's this place where discipline is absolutely important, but it's there to shape your child. And when it moves beyond that, you as a parent have to recognize the child's not going to recognize it. You have to recognize, maybe like you can say I've gone too far, but for me, one of the things that I realize is not just the going too far, but simply being able to acknowledge this isn't working. This doesn't
Mm,
shape this child. And we talk a little bit in the things about realizing the differences in our children, and realizing if I want to shape this child, I can't do it the same way I'm shaping that child.
wow.
And so, Jeremiah responds to me under the simplest of circumstances usually, but yet my daughter Emma, it takes a lot more work, and I realize that I can't do the same things to shape them, because I really, at the end of
Mm,
the day, I want to get the same result, which is healthy whole children who understand who they are in God's eyes, who understand that they're loved in this world, and who end up being a great influence in the world around them. It can't be just about control or peace and quiet, or whatever our,
mhm.
because man, in my emotions, and you can listen to the podcast and I'll share lots of my own stupidity in that. But yeah, that's been a great one. And this is our fourth episode. We just talked about our marriage in the midst of this parenting thing. And we kind of do it every other week. And so we really just loved it, honestly. I wonder at times, I'm like, we like to read the reviews we get, and people have been fantastic about those, but it's like, we kind of live in our own world, Jessica and I, at times, and we're like, well, I hope everybody likes watching our world, because this is how we talk to each other, right? This is almost a little insight into what it's like in our living room. And it's been fun doing it. It has been fun doing it. So
It's awesome, man.
yeah.
It's so cool, and I think that that's why it's at the point where it is now, and why I really believe that it's going to continue to grow and be really, really
Yeah.
successful, because of the dynamic that you guys have with each other, because of your honesty, because of the way that you invite people in, and you make yourselves accessible, and I think that it's so relatable, because I'm sure listening to some of the stories that you guys share of some of, like, the horrors, the horror stories that have happened,
Yeah.
and listening to Jessica talk about some things where she would just like listening to that story about about, I think it was was it your daughter like going around like opening
Oh
packages
yeah,
on people's
packages
doorsteps
on
and then
people's
basically just
Christmas.
like running, like her running away because she's so ashamed, and like I can't even begin to understand, like begin to figure out how I can try to explain to these people like why this happened. And
It's
just
so true.
and I'm sure that, you know, there are so many people out there that can just relate, and that's the real stuff. And so
Yeah,
it's not just, ah, man, it's anyway,
yeah.
I can keep going, but it's just, I just think it's really cool what you guys are
And
doing,
I've
and just
learned
so
now. I
needed.
mean, I've never done a lot of podcast listening. I listen to basically one. That's Craig Rochelle. You know, it's quick, it's informative, and Craig's just genius when it comes to leadership. So, but I don't do a lot. But what I've really become interested in, like realizing it's neat the influence you can have. You got to do it well. But like simply, you know, we're getting messages and we're getting these reviews. People in California, someone in Romania, someone in Ireland. It's like,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know, it's just neat to think, you know what, we can do something simple, and now you have this platform that's really much larger than you can even imagine, and it can reach people. And yeah, obviously I believe there's a leading in the Holy Spirit of that too. You know, it's just reaching people that are needing to hear it in the right moments at the right time. And it really is kind of cool. Actually, if you type in autism and faith, autism and Christianity, we're the first one that comes up because there's nothing else, you know.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
you can, if you type in autism and parenting, we're probably like, you know, the 8th or 9th or 10th. Um, you know, just depending. I think it seems to fluctuate. I don't know if it's based on views or if it's based on reviews, or how it works, but it fluctuates a little bit. And so, yeah, autism parenting, we're pretty close up there. You'll see us on
That's
the
awesome.
top if you end up searching it.
That's awesome. It's interesting that you said that about about Romania. Like I very rarely look at my analytics, because I'm just doing
Right.
my thing and I don't really, I mean, I care. I want it to grow. I want it to get bigger, but I'm just sort of in the beginning stages still of this podcast, so I'm
Yeah.
just kind of doing my thing and not really focusing too much on the numbers. I um I just noticed, I think it was this past week, I looked at just some of the analytical stuff that they keep track of. I didn't even know they kept track of this stuff, but I found out that like the number 2 country that this podcast is listened to in is Germany. And I was like, "What?" So of course America is number 1, but then, there was a pretty, and it was a fairly, I don't remember, I honestly don't remember what it was, but it was a fairly decent percentage of, like, views from Germany, and I was like, "Do I even know?" Like, I know a couple people. I literally know 1 family, I think, in Germany. So
Yeah.
I don't know where that's all coming from, but it's interesting, and just to see, like, the list, like, oh, people like watch this in England, and people
Yeah.
saw it in, like, you know, Bangladesh. And it's just like, that's pretty cool. It's just amazing the the reach that's available, because of how, you know, like, you can be
Yeah.
on the other side of the planet, and impacting lives of people that you don't even know who they are. I don't know how all that happens, but I'm grateful for it, and it's just, it's really cool.
And that's where I think that people tend to downplay their own possibility of influence. And, you know, I think when the church, you know, I'll get back to that just for a quick second. I know we might need to end soon, but for me, when the church realizes that it can change the world, and, you know, beyond a Sunday service, I mean, I love Sunday services, but beyond that Sunday service, when people just decide, hey, I'm going to tell my story. And then you have to also not have some expectation of what is going to come of that, because at the end of the day, you know, people ask us, well, what's your hopes? I'm like, to help people. However that ends up, that's the measurement of our success.
Yeah,
You know, it's not measured this, God's kingdom doesn't measure success the same way that we measure success. And sure, yeah, we
come
want to
on.
have earthly success, but at the end of the day, I just want to do what I feel God's calling us to do and help the people around us, and
That's right.
do it in any way that we think we can. And you find new ways, like a podcast or an adoption run. And you know, people, I like, I hear what you're saying even about Jess and I, and you know, I think we're pretty cool people, but at the end of the day, I'm like, we just decided to do something.
Right.
And I would just challenge you, even if it was some of the last things I say on this conversation with you, Duke, is like, to anybody listening out there, just try something. Try something out of the ordinary. Do something different. Impact someone's life in some way, until you find what works, and then stick with those things. Do those things. I think that a lot of people, maybe out of fear of rejection or insecurity of
Mm,
failure and those kinds of things, we just don't try a lot. I'm
that's right.
like, you ask me, I'm telling you all the great successful things that Jessica and I have done. I can tell you tons of things that have just not worked out. Like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, remember when we tried that and spent all that money and that didn't work in any way? Because we just try. We want to see what God can do with our lives, and we do it, So, and we're just normal, common people believing that the Holy Spirit can do great things with us.
It's so good, man. And yeah, I think John Maxwell has that book Failing Forward.
Yes,
And it's just such an important concept, whether we're
it
talking
is.
about business, ministry, family, relationships, raising kids,
Yep.
all these different things. And yeah, I think that what the world, like the stuff that we tend to present to the world, is the good stuff, sort of like our highlight reel, the stuff that looks
Yeah.
good and stuff like that. That's what we tend to present to people, but they tend not to see the struggle. They tend not to see the tears. They tend not to see all the failures and the mishaps that it took to kind of get to that place of
Hmm.
um I guess, to use the word success, you know what I mean? But to get to that place where there's something that's actually working. But again, that's something that I really appreciate about you two, specifically, is the way that you're honest about the struggles that you have had and the struggles that you do have, because
Hmm.
you're not even coming at it. It's easy too to sort of paint a picture of, well, we used to struggle like this, but then we learned and now we're doing great. And it's like, you don't even do that. You guys will talk about struggles that you're still having and
Yeah.
disagreements and things like that. And I just think it's like really refreshing. I think that it's really relatable. And I think that it lends to trust. I think that we can have this wrong concept of like, oh, well, people aren't going to trust me if they see that I'm broken, or if they see that I'm
Yep.
falling apart, or if they see that I've got these challenges. I've got to put on some kind of a show, some kind of a front. But people tend to be able to, if they spend enough time around you, they have a tendency to be able to begin to see through those things, and
Yep.
then it causes trust to actually break down, because what
Yep.
people are actually more interested in is something real and authentic. And if you can put that on display
100%.
for somebody, and it doesn't change who you are. The fact that you have struggles, the fact that you have challenges and issues, it doesn't change who you are and what's important to you. And it doesn't change the calling on your life. And it
Yep.
doesn't change. I think that it can actually impact or enhance the impact
Yeah.
that you can have on the people in your life. Again, whether we're talking
Yep.
about ministry or business or just
Yep.
living life and people
Yep.
relating to you. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. I think, well, first off, I think the world is desperate for authenticity.
That's right.
Especially in a world of social media where we are all just judging one another based on a profile pic and a screenshot and whatever else. At the end of the day, we are all desperate for authenticity without the requirement of looking a certain way. And I think that we can lead in that as the church. We haven't always led in that, but I think we can lead in that as the church and as people. And I think of Paul's words, some of his last letters. He gets more and more real with people, right? And he says,
Mm,
I boast in my weaknesses, because then God's made strong. And I think there's a realness to that when we are okay with saying, listen, I might be weak in this area, but it's not weakness without hope. It's weakness with the fact that I've got God in my life. I have Christ in my life, and he's going to overcome this. And maybe I don't see the end of that tunnel yet, but man, I'm going to believe. And so that's where we hope to live our lives, not in some perfect place or perfect state, but simply hope filled, joy filled, and helping lead people to those places as well. So
absolutely, 100%. Well, hey, Greg, if you would just point some people to the podcast, where can they go
yeah.
to find the podcast?
Yeah, so you can
And yeah,
find our podcast on Apple podcast, Amazon, Spotify. You can usually it's posted on Jessica's website. I would just encourage you check out Jessica's website. It's jessicahurlbut.com. And if you never heard the last name Hurlbut, that's okay. Most of the world has not. It's kind of an English-German thing, Hurlbut, Jessica, Hurlbut.com. And you can find the podcast there as well, links to it. But if you just search Full Spectrum Parent, honestly, in Google right now, anywhere, if you're listening, you can find it almost immediately. And the easiest way to leave a review is always in Apple Podcasts. It seems like the other ones are all weird and kind of clunky.
Yeah, isn't that annoying?
Yeah,
It's annoying to me. I'm always like, hey, leave a review. And they're like, well, I don't have an iPhone or an iPad. It's like, all right, well.
I'm like, yeah, well, get on board with the rest of the world,
Yeah.
I'm an Apple fan for sure. But yeah, so you can find it there.
I'm actually not, but so I'm actually part of the problem is what I'm saying, Greg.
Okay. But you're just the holdouts. You just don't want to admit how good Apple's done.
I love this Galaxy Note so much.
Anyway,
but yeah, so jessicahurlbut.com. That's up on the screen for anybody watching this interview live. I did see a couple questions come in, so I just want to reiterate the name of the podcast is the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. It's available on all the major podcast platforms, right? You can find it on Spotify, obviously Apple, as you mentioned. And again, you can go to jessicahurlbut.com and find some other links and resources there, as well as the podcast. And
there's a video version on YouTube.
That's right. Yeah.
We're just developing her YouTube thing. I mean, there's literally only the 4 videos on there right now, but you can try to look up Jessica Hurlbut or Full Spectrum Parent podcast on there too. So, yeah.
Very cool. So your podcast episodes come out every other Wednesday?
Every other Thursday. So, well, I mean, it's like 12 a.m. We do it the day before, and we post it at 12 a.m. Thursday. So, yeah, every other week. I think last week we posted one. Yes, we posted one last Thursday. So the next one will be a week from this Thursday. Yeah, right now it's just kind of that bi-weekly setup.
Cool. Well, Greg, I definitely would love to have you back on in the future, because we didn't get a chance to get into any of the church stuff, the church planting, and I'd love to kind of hear about that whole aspect of your world as well. So maybe if you're down for it, we can set something up and get you to come back and we can talk about that. But
yeah,
anybody who's
all day long.
Yeah. Let's just share, just in case if anyone's interested in maybe I'm sure, do you have like on your church website maybe some sermons and teachings and things like that if anyone's interested in hearing some of that?
Yep, so the name of our church is New Testament Church of Messina, and you can find that on Facebook, New Testament Church Messina. You might find a few other ones in Northern New York, New Testament Church Plattsburgh, Ogdensburg. Those are all our churches that we've planted. But yeah, I am the pastor at New Testament Church in Messina, and also I'm starting a church right now in Ogdensburg, so you'll see that one. But yeah, and ntcmessina.com is our website, and that's just a typical website. You'll see what we are about, and I think actually there's a podcast form on there from our sermons, and then the video footage is always there too. So
awesome. Well, Greg, thanks so much. And just to kind of just as one final thing here, I really do appreciate what you were talking about with when we started talking about the podcast, and you were talking about how when you and Jessica earlier on, where you were looking for something, you were looking for some resources, and there were definitely a lot of resources in terms of being able to talk to people and have conversations and commiserate, but the hope aspect, the hope factor was definitely missing. And I love that. I love that that's what you're doing. As far as your ministry, as far as the adoption runs, as far as like all these different things, it's like there's this hopefulness that you guys are interested in sharing with the world, because it's a big deal. It's a big problem that there's 500,000 children in foster care in a system that's broken, filled with amazing people that love these kids and that are working their butts off to try to get people, placed in families and making sure that they have a decent life and all of that. But the system itself, almost like battling against the system and that kind of thing. And then, going back to some of the stories that we were alluding to, I would say, as far as how challenging it can be to uh, be involved in or be a parent of children with special needs and things of that nature. But the fact that in the midst of all of it, the thing that you're trying to echo the loudest is that there's hope, that there's hope
Yeah.
in Jesus, that you're not alone, and that it's okay to I was thinking about this just yesterday, because there's this statement that people make: it's okay not to be okay.
Yeah.
There's a statement that people make, and I agree. I agree with that 100%.
Yep.
But I do have a challenge with it when people use that as an excuse to stay where they are. And the fact is, like, it's okay to feel the way that you feel. So, like, whatever we're
Right.
talking about, it's okay to be, emotional about something. It's okay to feel broken. It's okay to be down. Like, it's okay to be where you are.
Yes.
And like, as someone, especially not understanding the situation, like, I would never want to belittle that, or God forbid, like, condemn somebody for feeling the way that they feel. But at the same time, it is okay not to be okay, but it's also okay not to stay there, because of the
Yes.
fact that Jesus did everything necessary to pull you out of that place
Yes.
of whatever it is: desperation, despair, darkness, whatever it is that you're feeling, whatever the challenges are that are facing in your life. That hope factor is so key. I think so many of the challenges that we're having in our world today, Greg, with like the arguing back and forth across the aisles and the
Oh,
us
yeah.
versus them mentalities, the tribalism, these things that we're having, I think that so much of it stems from a lack of hope. And when
Yeah.
God's people stand up from this place of a message of hope, there's just automatic influence and authority that follows that. Like, when you go into a situation that seems hopeless, but you go into that situation with hope,
Yeah.
there's automatic authority that enters into that situation, into the circumstances with you. And so, just as we're sort of wrapping up here, not to put you on the spot, but just if you have any final thoughts on just any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, First Peter 3:15, right? I think it is. If I'm misquoting, someone can correct me later, but I'm pretty sure I'm right on that. The idea of being, Peter says, be ready to give an answer for the hope that lies within you. And I think we almost take that as like this, oh, that's a cute little verse. But at the end of the day, if the world doesn't look at us as Christians and as the church and go, why do they have hope and I don't? Then I'm not sure what we're doing. So I want people, even in
Wow.
the mid, I think the pandemic and the racism things and all the stuff that's been going on, terrible, but an incredible opportunity for the church to actually look different. Unfortunately, I'd say
That's right.
some of us aren't doing a great job in that.
Yeah.
I haven't loved all of Christianity's response to this stuff, but it should be a backdrop in which someone looks at my life and goes, how come in the middle of this you have hope?
Come on.
And then I should have an answer, right? They should be asking us the question. I honestly think that's probably the greatest evangelistic tactic there is. Have so much hope that you make people wonder why.
Dude,
And
come on.
then someone's asking you, and
Oh,
you're like, well,
I
I'll
love
tell
that.
you why, because Jesus showed me a different way, and I see a
So
different
good.
world, and I believe that there's a possibility out of this. And I think even right from the get-go with COVID in March of 2020, we had to shut down for 15 weeks. And of course, those first couple of weeks, you're just kind of reeling and we're trying to get our feet under us. And I came back to our staff and I said, I don't care what's happening. I don't care what we have to stop doing, but we are going to present the world with some hope. We're going to try in the midst of this. And because, I think, honestly, I feel like COVID's been a dang excuse for too many people for too long now, where we're just like,
Agree.
oh, sorry, can't do that, COVID. You know what? I'm sorry. We're going to try something. And I'm not saying that about everything, but when it comes to the church and to presenting hope to the world that's around us, we better be doing really well at that. Please try. That's my last words.
Please try. Yeah, come on. Get up and do something. Man, I love that so much. Have so much hope
Yeah.
that people wonder why. Um, that's incredible. That's incredible. I love that. I'm gonna steal that.
I stole it too, so from the Bible. No.
Yeah, it's so good. Well, Greg, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate
Yeah,
you. Thanks for your time. And I've enjoyed this extended conversation, getting to know you and getting to know, just hear a little bit more about your world. And I'm so appreciative of the work that you guys, that you and Jessica, your family, your church family are doing to make an impact on well, specifically in your area of upstate New York, but also how you guys, man, we got to get you back on and talk about your church plants and things like
yeah,
that, because you guys are expanding and impacting other areas up there, and also the stuff that you guys are doing for this advocacy for adoption and foster care, and how that's extending all over, not just in your
yeah.
region, but all over the place. And again, just so appreciative of you and of what you guys are doing. So thanks again, man.
All right, thanks, Duke.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time to check out this episode. I really hope that you enjoyed it and that it blessed you in some way. If anything sparked within you and you're interested in finding out more about adoption or about foster care, you can visit, the website was adoptuskids.org, right?
Yes.
Is there anywhere else that you would point somebody, or is that the best place
That's
to
the
kind of?
general one. If not that, go to your local DSS,
Awesome.
Department of Social Services.
Awesome. Very cool. Visit jessicahurlbut.com to find links to the podcast and some other resources and things of that nature. Check out the podcast, the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast, on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. I know that it'll be a blessing to you. And specifically, let me just say this real quick. Specifically, if you, because maybe you're listening to this and you're not a parent of special needs kids, maybe you don't have any special needs kids in your personal family or that you're personally connected to, but I guarantee you, you know at least somebody, and probably several people that do. So I just want to encourage you, forget about real life talk right now. I really want to encourage you to find, go online, go to Spotify, go to Apple, go to Google, whatever you want to do, find the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast and share it with somebody that you know in your life that is raising children specifically with special needs. And please share it with them, because I know that it will be a blessing to them to hear from this perspective and the wisdom. And again, to hear from people that are very just real and authentic and in the trenches with you. So please, please, please do that. I would really personally appreciate that. So, but again, thank you guys so much for taking the time to check out this episode. Really, really appreciate it. If you get around to it, don't do this until you do the other one, until you do the Full Spectrum Parent Podcast. If you get around to it, if this episode blessed you, if you consider subscribing, sharing, leaving a review for all of you Apple users, I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Have an awesome day. And oh, by the way, there will not be an episode of Real Life Talk on Thursday because it's Thanksgiving, and I know nobody's going to be available to listen to this on Thursday. So have an awesome Thanksgiving, and love y'all. We'll see you next time.